My husband confessed after 15 years of marriage. I love your sister. She is pregnant by me. I silently called my sister and said one word. When she heard it, she went pale. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had the kind of life other women quietly envied. A colonial-style house on a tree-lined street in Naperville, Illinois. A husband who came home for dinner most nights. 2 kids, Lily, 11, and Connor, 8, who still believed the world was essentially good. A career I had built from nothing. Regional manager at a healthcare consulting firm. 12 years of grinding, of proving myself in rooms where I was always the only woman and often the only person who had actually read the entire report. I was not naive. I was not soft. But I suppose I was trusting in the particular way that people become trusting when nothing has yet given them a reason not to be. His name was Daniel Mercer. 43 years old, civil engineer, the kind of man who fixed the neighbor's fence without being asked and coached Connor's little league team on Saturday mornings. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of shared grocery lists, of arguing over thermostat settings, of building something that felt from the inside like a real life. And my sister, Lauren, 2 years younger than me, 38 at the time, a yoga instructor with a studio in Oak Park. Lauren, who had been my maid of honor. Lauren, who called me every Sunday evening. Lauren, who had borrowed my winter coat the previous November and still had not returned it. Looking back, I can see the signals with a clarity that is almost embarrassing. The way Daniel's phone screen always dimmed the moment I walked into a room. The way he started showering immediately after coming home from his weekly project site visits, a habit he'd never had in 14 years prior. The way Lauren stopped joining our family dinners in October, citing scheduling conflicts that never seemed to resolve. And then there were the smaller things. The things I filed away without meaning to. Daniel had started buying a brand of coffee he'd always said he hated, because Lauren drank it. He came home one Sunday in March smelling faintly of a candle scent that was not mine and not ours. Once, when I walked into the kitchen quietly, I caught him smiling at his phone with the particular softness of a man who believes he is alone. I told myself these were not signs. I told myself I was reading into nothing because I was stressed at work. I told myself that a man who coaches his son's baseball team on Saturday mornings does not lead a double life on Tuesday afternoons. And then came the Saturday that rearranged everything. It was April. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend. I had come home early from a conference in Chicago, a last-minute cancellation, nothing dramatic, and walked into my own kitchen to find Daniel sitting at the table, hands flat on the surface, with the expression of a man who had already rehearsed what he was about to say. He looked up. He did not look surprised to see me. That, I would later understand, was intentional. He had chosen this moment. He had been waiting for it. "Sit down," he said, "please." I sat. The room was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking. I remember thinking that was strange. It was a well-trained dog. It rarely barked. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I said nothing. I waited. "I've been having an affair." He paused. His jaw tightened. "It's been going on for almost 2 years. I didn't plan it. I know that doesn't matter, but I need you to know. I'm in love with her." The room did not spin. My heart did not shatter in the cinematic way it does in movies. What I felt was something closer to a sudden and absolute silence inside my own body, as if every system had momentarily stopped to process incoming data. "Who?" I said. It was not even a question. It was a word I already knew the answer to. He looked at the table. "Lauren." 1 second, 2. There's more, he said. She's pregnant. 3 months. I sat with that for a moment. My sister, my maid of honor, the woman who called me every Sunday evening and still had my winter coat. I stood up. I walked to the counter. I picked up my phone. I found Lauren's name. I pressed call. It rang twice. "Hey, you," she answered, her voice warm and ordinary and utterly unchanged. I said one word, "Congratulations." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 4 full seconds. When I heard her breath catch, when I heard the sound a person makes when the ground disappears beneath them, I ended the call. I set my phone face down on the counter, and I looked at Daniel, who had gone the color of old chalk. "I'm going to need you to leave the house," I said. "Tonight." He did not leave that night. Not because I backed down, I did not, but because Daniel Mercer was, above all else, a man who believed that if he simply stayed in the room long enough, the situation would eventually bend toward him. He sat at that kitchen table for 2 more hours. He talked, he explained, he used words like complicated and unexpected, and at one point the phrase, "I never wanted to hurt you," which is the linguistic equivalent of a man setting your house on fire and then expressing genuine regret about the smoke. I did not cry. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard. The swing set Daniel had assembled 3 summers ago, the garden bed I had planted myself, the fire pit we had used exactly twice. And I listened to him talk. Not because I wanted to hear it, but because I had learned over 12 years in corporate negotiations that the person who stops speaking first is the person who loses. He left at 11:30. He took a bag. He said he was going to a hotel. I did not ask which one. The house was very quiet after that. I sat on the edge of the bed. Our bed, the one we had driven 2 hours to a furniture store in Downers Grove to choose together, and I let myself have exactly 30 minutes. 30 minutes to feel the full weight of what had happened. The betrayal was not singular. It was layered, compounded, geometric. It was not just Daniel, it was Lauren. It was 2 years of Sunday phone calls during which she had asked about my marriage while conducting an affair inside it. It was the baby, which was not an abstraction but a fact, a living consequence now embedded in my family's tissue, like a splinter that had worked its way too deep to ignore. What did I stand to lose? I made a list, not metaphorically. I am a regional manager. I make actual lists. The house was in both our names. We had joint accounts, primary checking, 2 savings, a brokerage account I had largely funded from my own bonuses. Daniel's income was solid, but mine was higher. I had been the primary earner for the last 4 years. Lily and Connor. The children were the weight that made everything else feel secondary. Whatever I did next, I could not let them become collateral damage in a war they had not started. The fear came in waves that first night, not fear of Daniel. I had lost whatever softness I held for him in the 30 seconds between the words Lauren and pregnant. The fear was practical. Divorce is expensive, slow, and frequently designed to exhaust the person who is more emotionally invested into accepting a worse settlement. I had seen it happen to colleagues, to friends, to my own mother 20 years ago when my father left and she spent 3 years recovering what should have taken 6 months to secure. I was not going to let that happen. By 2 a.m, I had stopped grieving and started planning. I had 3 immediate advantages. First, I was the higher earner, which meant I had access to financial records Daniel might assume I had never scrutinized. Second, I was methodical. Daniel was emotional. He always had been. And emotional people make mistakes when they believe they are winning. Third, he did not yet know how I intended to respond. He had expected tears, or screaming, or pleading. My silence had unsettled him. Good. Unsettled people reveal things. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia Holt. I had retained her 2 years ago for a workplace contract dispute, and I had kept her number precisely because she was the kind of lawyer who did not flinch. I explained the situation in 6 sentences. She told me to come in Monday morning and to touch nothing, no accounts, no documents, until we had spoken. I also called my mother. This was harder. My mother loved Lauren in the way that parents love their more fragile child, with a protective ferocity that sometimes crowded out everything else. I told her only what she needed to know, that Daniel and I were separating, that there were reasons I would explain in person, and that the children did not yet know. My mother was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" That was the sentence that almost broke me. Not Daniel's confession, not Lauren's silence on the phone. That one question, offered without condition. "Help with the kids," I said. "For now, just that." Lauren texted me that Sunday. A long message. I could see from the preview that it was very long. I did not open it. I let it sit in my phone, unread, because I knew that whatever it contained was designed to manage me, and I was no longer available to be managed. Daniel called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. The plan was not fully formed yet, but its bones were solid. I was going to protect my children, secure my assets, and ensure that every decision Daniel and Lauren had made over the past 2 years had a proportional, legal, and permanent consequence. I was not angry. Anger is loud and expensive, and it causes people to move too fast. What I felt was something quieter and considerably more dangerous: clarity. Patricia Holt's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Chicago, and on Monday morning I sat across from her with a manila folder, a legal pad, and the particular composure of someone who has not slept more than 3 hours but has no intention of showing it. Patricia was 51, sharp-featured, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who had heard every version of this story and found none of them surprising. She listened. She took notes. When I finished, she set down her pen. "You said he told you 2 years," she said. "That's what he said." "That gives us a window." She pulled up something on her screen. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not community property. That means the court divides assets fairly, not equally. But adultery is a factor the court can consider, particularly if marital assets were used to fund the affair. I leaned forward. Were they? That's what we're going to find out. She assigned a financial investigator, a woman named Denise, who worked out of a cluttered office in Evanston and had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding things people had tried to hide. Within 72 hours, Denise had pulled 3 years of credit card statements and cross-referenced them against Daniel's stated work expenses. What she found was not dramatic, it was methodical. Hotel stays on Tuesday afternoons billed to a card in Daniel's name that I had never been told existed. Restaurant charges in Oak Park, Lauren's neighborhood, on evenings when Daniel had told me he was working late. 2 purchases from a jewelry store in Lincoln Park. Neither piece of jewelry had ever appeared in our home. I looked at the spreadsheet Denise sent me and felt something settle in my chest, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a very still lake. He had opened a separate credit card. That was legally significant, Patricia explained, because it demonstrated intentional financial concealment, which, layered on top of adultery, substantially strengthened my position in court regarding the division of marital assets. Meanwhile, I'd begun to understand that Daniel and Lauren were starting to sense that something was shifting. Lauren sent 3 more texts that week. I continued not to open them. On Wednesday, Daniel showed up at the house. He no longer had a key. I had changed the locks on Sunday afternoon and knocked on the front door for 11 minutes before leaving. I watched from the upstairs window. I did not go down. On Thursday evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered. It was Lauren. Her voice was different from the Sunday call. Controlled, but with something underneath it that sounded like the early stages of panic. "We need to talk," she said. "In person, not like this." "Like what?" I asked. "Like you ignoring me. You're shutting me out, and I understand why I do, but we're sisters, Claire. We can't just—" "Lauren," I said, "I'm going to stop you there." My voice was even. "I have nothing to say to you right now. When I do, you'll hear from my attorney." She went silent, then, "Your attorney? Claire, this doesn't have to be—" I ended the call. That was the moment they understood. Not when I had said congratulations on the phone, not when Daniel had left with his bag. This moment, the word attorney, was when both of them understood that I was not processing grief. I was building a case. On Friday morning, Patricia filed for divorce on my behalf. Grounds: irreconcilable differences. The adultery was documented, but we would deploy it strategically, not immediately. A legal decision, not an emotional one. Simultaneously, she sent a formal letter to Daniel's attorney, because by then he had one, which told me that he had been preparing for this conversation longer than he had let on. I remember driving home from Patricia's office on that Friday afternoon through the familiar streets of Naperville, past the coffee shop where Daniel and I had our first date, past the park where I had pushed both children on swings until my arms ached. The city looked exactly the same. That struck me as vaguely unjust, but I was past the point of return now. The papers were filed, the financial evidence was compiled, the locks were changed, and for the first time in 2 weeks, when I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, I felt something that was not grief and not rage and not fear. It felt like ground beneath my feet. The divorce filing hit Daniel the way I had intended it to, before he was ready. He had, I later learned through Patricia, assumed I would spend at least another week in an emotional holding pattern, crying, calling mutual friends, perhaps reaching out to him with conditions for reconciliation. He had underestimated me in the precise way that men who have betrayed their wives often do, by assuming that love, once given, cannot be cleanly withdrawn. He was wrong. I had withdrawn it in the 30 seconds between Lauren and pregnant. Everything after that was logistics. Patricia's strategy was methodical. We requested full financial disclosure. We filed a motion to freeze the joint brokerage account, the one with $214,000 funded primarily by my bonuses, to prevent Daniel from moving assets before settlement. We documented the hidden credit card. We had Denise's spreadsheet. We had 2 years of hotel receipts. We were 2 weeks into the process when they came at me. It started with Daniel. He showed up at Connor's baseball practice on a Saturday, which he had every right to do. He was still their father, and I had been careful not to interfere with that. But after the game, he pulled me aside near the parking lot. "This is getting out of hand," he said. His voice had the controlled aggression of a man who knows he is losing, but hasn't fully admitted it to himself yet. "You froze the account. I can't access money that I put into that account, Claire. Your attorney can address that with mine," I said. "I'm not talking to you through attorneys. We were married for 15 years. "Yes," I said, "we were." He stepped closer, not threateningly. Daniel was not a physically aggressive man, but in the way people do when they want to remind you of proximity, of history. "If you push this the way you're planning to," he said, "it's going to get ugly for everyone, including the kids." I looked at him. "Are you threatening to make this ugly for your own children?" He had the grace to look away. That was Daniel. Then came Lauren. She did not come in person, not yet. She called my mother. This was the move I had not anticipated, and I will admit it was more effective than anything Daniel had done. My mother called me that Sunday evening, and her voice had the particular strained quality of someone who is trying to be neutral in a situation that does not allow for neutrality. "Lauren called me," she said. Claire, she's scared. She's 3 months pregnant and she's scared." "She should have considered that earlier," I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. "She's still your sister." "She had an affair with my husband for 2 years, Mom." Silence. Then, "I know. I'm not defending her. I'm telling you what she said. She said she wants to talk. She said she's not going to fight you on the divorce. She just wants—" "I know what she wants," I said. "She wants me to be manageable. She wants me to be sad and forgiving and focused on processing my feelings so that I stop being a legal threat. And I need you to understand that I love you, and I need you. And I also need you to not be a messenger for the woman who destroyed my marriage." My mother was quiet for a very long moment. "All right," she said finally. "All right." What I had not expected was the letter. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the house, physical, handwritten, from Lauren. 4 pages. I did not read it. I photographed each page and forwarded the images to Patricia, then placed the letter in a drawer. Patricia called me the next afternoon. "She references the pregnancy extensively," she said. "She's framing it as a reason for you to be compassionate." "Is there anything in it that's legally relevant?" There are 2 sentences where she implies that if you pursue an aggressive settlement, Daniel may seek primary custody of the children on grounds of your work schedule and travel demands. I was quiet. "That," Patricia said carefully, "is a threat." "Yes," I said, "it is." I sat with that for the rest of the day. The custody threat was the thing that could actually hurt me. Not financially, not socially, but in the one place where I had no armor. I went to my daughter's room that evening after she was asleep and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her face for a long time. Then Connor's room, then back to my own bedroom, where I sat with the light off. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days away from the filing, from Patricia's calls, from the spreadsheets. I took the kids to my mother's. I slept. I ran every morning for an hour along the lakefront path in Chicago, in the cold, until my lungs ached and my mind went quiet. On the 3rd morning, I ran farther than I had planned. I came back. I showered. I called Patricia. "I'm ready," I said. The temptation when it came was not what I had expected. I had braced for another legal maneuver, another letter, another phone call through intermediaries, another threat delivered at a distance. What I got instead was Daniel himself, at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Lily's school, where I had stopped on a Tuesday morning after drop-off. He was already there when I walked in. I do not believe it was a coincidence. I believe he had been watching my patterns, the way someone does when they are running out of moves and falling back on proximity. He looked different. He had lost weight. Not attractively the way stress rarely produces attractive results. And there were shadows under his eyes that I recognized from the first months after Connor was born, when neither of us had slept properly. He was wearing the green jacket I had given him for his 40th birthday. I did not know if that was deliberate. He stood when he saw me. "Claire, just 5 minutes, please." I looked at him for a moment. I considered leaving. Then I sat down because I was not afraid of 5 minutes and because I wanted to know what shape the temptation would take. He sat across from me. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He looked at me the way he used to look at me in the early years, with something that wanted to be read as sincerity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "I imagine you have. The custody thing. That wasn't from me. That was in Lauren's letter, and I didn't know she was going to say it. I want you to know that." I said nothing. "I don't want to fight over the kids," he said. "I never did. Claire, we built something together. 15 years. I destroyed it. I know that. But I don't want to destroy everything. I'm asking you to consider a mediated settlement, something we can both live with, without," he paused, "without making this a war." And there it was, the offer dressed as peace. He was asking me to step back from Patricia's strategy, which was working, and move to mediation, where the financial pressure on him would be considerably reduced and where the hidden credit card and the hotel receipts would carry less weight. "Daniel," I said, "you used marital assets to fund a 2-year affair with my sister." "I know. You opened a credit card I didn't know existed to pay for hotel rooms." "I know. And now you're asking me to mediate." He said nothing. "No," I said. I picked up my coffee. "I'll see you in court." I left the coffee shop. I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel for exactly 1 minute, letting myself feel the small electric charge of having held my ground. Then I drove to work. It was during this period, the 5th and 6th weeks after the filing, that I began to understand how much I needed the people who were simply, unreservedly on my side. My colleague and closest friend at work was a woman named Sandra Okafor. She was the kind of friend who had always been there without fanfare. The person who sent me a dinner delivery the night Daniel left without me having asked, who showed up to Lily's school play when I was stuck on a conference call and sat in my seat so the chair wasn't empty. Sandra did not try to tell me what to feel or how to proceed. She asked what I needed each time she saw me, and then she did exactly that. I also, on Patricia's recommendation, began seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Marin Ellis, and her office was in a Victorian house in Oak Park. An awkward geography, given that Lauren's yoga studio was 4 blocks away, but I chose not to let that drive a decision. Dr. Ellis was practical, direct, and allergic to sentimentality, which suited me exactly. She did not encourage me to forgive on any particular timeline. She said, "You're allowed to be furious and still make clear-headed decisions. Those 2 things are not incompatible." I kept that sentence in my phone's notes app. I returned to it often. The legal process moved steadily forward. Patricia had filed the motion. The account was frozen. Daniel's attorney was requesting extensions. A stalling tactic, she said. Standard practice when the other side has stronger documentation. We denied the extensions. I was not at peace, but I was functional, supported, and moving. And for now, that was enough. They came on a Sunday afternoon in late May, and they came together. I had not expected that. I had imagined if they ever came in person that it would be separately. Daniel with his remorse, Lauren with her explanations, each of them working on me individually in the way they always had, in the years before all this, when they had apparently been far closer than I knew. But they came together. They rang my doorbell at 2 p.m. when the kids were at a birthday party and the house was quiet and I was sitting at my kitchen table with financial documents spread across it like a second career. I opened the door because I wanted to see what they looked like standing there on my porch together. Lauren was visibly pregnant now, a small, neat bump under a pale blue dress, her hair down. She looked the way she had always looked, which was part of what made it so disorienting. Like my sister. Exactly like my sister. The person I had known for 38 years. The person who had held my hair back when I had food poisoning at 19 and driven through a snowstorm to bring me soup when Lily had croup. She was also the person who'd been sleeping with my husband for 2 years. Daniel stood slightly behind her. He was wearing a collared shirt, which meant he had prepared for this. He looked less like the hollowed-out man from the coffee shop and more like the version of himself that was trying, which was in some ways more dangerous. "We won't take much time," Lauren said. Her voice was careful, the way a person's voice sounds when they have rehearsed what they intend to say, but are hoping it will come out as spontaneous. "You're right," I said, "you won't." They sat at my kitchen table because I had not prevented them from coming in, and I was not sure, looking back, why I let them. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps because there is a part of being human that cannot resist watching the shape a thing takes when it fully reveals itself. Lauren spoke first. She said she was sorry. She said it in detail, with texture, in the way that someone is sorry when they have thought about how they will express their apology rather than simply feeling it. She said she hadn't planned it. She said Daniel had come to her when the marriage was already struggling. Already struggling, she said, as if this were a shared diagnosis rather than a verdict, and that she had made a terrible choice. She said the baby was not something she had planned and that she understood if I hated her, but that she hoped someday we could find a way back to each other. I sat across the table and listened without expression. Then Daniel spoke. He said he wanted to discuss the settlement. Not in those words, but that was the architecture underneath what he said. He said that the court route was going to be expensive for everyone, that the children were going to be exposed to conflict, that Lily was old enough to understand things she shouldn't have to understand. He said he wanted to make this right. "What does making it right look like to you?" I asked. He slid a paper across the table. It was a rough outline of a proposed settlement, clearly drafted by his attorney, that was considerably more generous than what he'd initially offered, but still substantially less than what Patricia believed we could secure in court. The account would be unfrozen. A settlement number was suggested. Custody would be split equally with primary residence at the house. "We're asking you to consider this," Lauren said, "because it's better for everyone. For the children. For you. You can move forward faster, with less." "Lauren," I said, "let me ask you something. She stopped. Did you come here today because you're sorry? She blinked. Of course. Or did you come here because you're 3 months from delivering a child and you need Daniel's legal situation resolved before that happens? The silence in the kitchen was complete. Lauren's jaw tightened. And in that tightening, in that one involuntary movement, I saw the mask she had been wearing since she rang my doorbell. Not the sister. The negotiator. That's not fair, she said. Her voice had changed. The careful warmth had dropped away. I'm not interested in fair, I said. I'm interested in accurate. Daniel put his hand on the table, flat, the same gesture he had used on the night of his confession. Claire, you need to be realistic about what a court case will... Get out of my house, I said. It was quiet. Then Lauren stood. She picked up her purse. Her face had closed in on itself, the way faces do when the performance is over and there is nothing underneath it but anger. You're going to regret this, she said. Not loudly, almost gently, which was worse. Out, I said. Daniel looked at me one final time. I met his eyes. There was nothing left there that frightened me. They left. I locked the door. I stood in my kitchen alone and breathed through the small, sharp pulse of fear that moved through me. Not because of what they had said, but because of the look on Lauren's face when she said, "You're going to regret this." It was the look of someone who had other moves, someone who was not finished. But fear, I had learned, was information. And this particular fear told me I needed to move faster. I called Patricia that evening. Speed up wherever we can, I said. I want this resolved before the baby arrives. The hearing was scheduled for the second Thursday of June. It was a preliminary hearing. Not the full trial, but a critical juncture where the financial documentation would be presented and the court would hear arguments about asset division and temporary custody arrangements. Patricia had told me this was often where cases were won or settled. Once both sides saw the evidence laid out on a table, the calculations changed. I arrived with Patricia at 8:30 in the morning. The Cook County Courthouse in downtown Chicago is not a dramatic building. It is beige and procedural in the way that institutions designed to process human misery often are. And I sat in a hallway outside the courtroom in a charcoal blazer and waited. Daniel arrived with his attorney, a man named Garrett, who wore expensive cufflinks and had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to winning through technical maneuvers rather than merit. Lauren was not present. She was not a party to the divorce itself, but I knew she was the shape behind everything Daniel's side was doing. The hearing began. Garrett opened by challenging the freeze on the brokerage account, arguing that Daniel had equal rights to access. Patricia countered by presenting Denise's financial report, the hidden credit card, the hotel charges cross-referenced by date and location against Daniel's alleged work calendar, the jewelry purchases, the 2-year trail of concealed expenditure. She presented it methodically, without drama, in the tone of someone reading a weather report. I watched Daniel across the room. He sat very still. His attorney leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Daniel's jaw moved. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and the expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything, reviewed the documents with the focused attention of a person doing actual work. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "this account was opened in September of 2 years ago." "Yes, Your Honor," Garrett answered. "And the primary cardholder listed is your client?" "Yes. And the charges documented here, totaling approximately $31,000 over 22 months, were not disclosed to Mrs. Mercer at any point. A pause. The charges were personal. I asked whether they were disclosed, the judge said. Garrett adjusted his cufflinks. They were not disclosed, Your Honor. The room was quiet. I did not look at Daniel. I looked at the judge. And then came the moment that broke open the other side entirely. Patricia stood. Your Honor, I would also like to introduce a communication received by my client in the form of a written letter, dated May 9th of this year, authored by Lauren Calloway, my client's sister and the party with whom Mr. Mercer conducted the affair. In this letter, Ms. Calloway implicitly references the use of a custody threat as leverage against my client's legal position. I would characterize this as an attempt to intimidate a party in active divorce proceedings. Garrett was on his feet instantly. Objection. That letter is not— I have the original and 3 copies, Patricia said calmly. The judge held out her hand. Patricia placed the letter in it. I had read those 2 sentences, the ones Patricia had described on the phone, the ones about Daniel seeking primary custody based on my work schedule, and they were, in isolation, legally ambiguous, but in context, submitted alongside the financial documentation, alongside the evidence of concealment, they told a story. The judge read the relevant section. She looked up. She looked at Garrett. Counselor, she said, I strongly advise your client to reconsider his approach to these proceedings. Garrett turned to Daniel. Something passed between them, a rapid, hushed exchange. Daniel's face had gone through several expressions in the preceding 20 minutes, controlled, then anxious, then something that looked, briefly, like the expression of a man realizing that the floor plan he had memorized no longer matched the building he was in. He grabbed his attorney's arm and said something. Garrett straightened. Your Honor, my client would like to request a brief recess to discuss— Denied, the judge said. We'll continue. I had spent weeks preparing for anger in that room. What I felt instead was something much quieter, the sensation of watching a structure that had been built on concealment encounter, for the first time open air. Daniel tried twice more to speak through his attorney, to reframe, to redirect. Each time, Patricia had a document, a date, a figure. Each time, Garrett's responses grew slightly less fluent, slightly less confident. By 11:15, the judge had ruled. The account freeze would remain in place pending full settlement. The request for temporary primary custody filed by Daniel's side, filed, I discovered, just 8 days prior without my knowledge, was denied. The court would proceed with the documentation as submitted. Walking out of the courthouse into the June sunlight, Patricia said very little. She adjusted her bag strap. She looked at me. That went well, she said. Yes, I said, it did. The full settlement was finalized 6 weeks later in late July. There was no trial. After the June hearing, Daniel's attorney reached out to Patricia within 48 hours with a revised proposal, considerably more favorable than anything he had offered before. We reviewed it. We countered. The back and forth took 3 weeks, conducted entirely through attorneys, which meant I did not have to be in a room with Daniel again until the signing. The final terms. I retained the house. The mortgage was refinanced in my name alone, which I could manage on my income. The brokerage account, the $214,000, was divided in a ratio that reflected the court's assessment of the concealed expenditure. I received 68%. Daniel's retirement account, which was smaller, was split evenly. Child support was set at a figure that accounted for the disparity in our incomes. Physical custody was structured with primary residence at the house, with me, and Daniel having the children alternating weekends and 2 evenings a week. The hidden credit card balance, $31,000, was assigned entirely to Daniel as marital debt he had unilaterally incurred. I signed the papers on a Wednesday afternoon in late July in Patricia's office at a conference table that looked out over the Chicago skyline. Daniel was in an adjacent conference room. I did not see him. The logistics had been arranged deliberately to prevent any direct encounter. A paralegal carried documents back and forth. It took 45 minutes. When it was done, Patricia walked me out. In the elevator, she said, "You handled this exceptionally well." "I had help," I said. "Yes," she said, "but you also had to choose to use it." I drove home to Naperville in afternoon traffic, listening to nothing. The kids were with my mother. The house would be quiet when I arrived. I had not permitted myself to think too far past the signing because the signing had been the horizon I was working toward, and looking beyond horizons before you reach them tends to make the distance feel impossible. But I reached it. I walked into my house, in my name, on a street where I had lived for 9 years. And I set my keys on the counter and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then I called my mother. "It's done," I said. She exhaled, long and slow, the way someone breathes when they have been holding their breath for months. "Come get the kids," she said. "I'll have dinner ready." I drove to my mother's house in Evanston. Lily was at the kitchen table doing a puzzle. Connor was in the backyard with his grandmother's old Labrador. When Lily saw me, she looked at my face. She's always been able to read my face. And something in her expression settled. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm going to be," I said. And for the first time in 4 months, I meant it completely. There was one final matter. 3 weeks after the settlement was signed, I received, through Patricia, a request from Lauren. She was asking whether I would consider some form of contact, given that she would soon be delivering a child who was technically my niece or nephew, and who would share a father with my children. I sat with the request for 2 days. Then I wrote a short letter, through Patricia, not directly, that said the following: I would not be pursuing a relationship with Lauren. I would not prevent my children, when they were old enough to make their own decisions, from forming whatever relationship with their half-sibling they chose. Beyond that, I had nothing to offer. The letter was 4 sentences. I signed it with my full name. Lauren did not respond. I did not need her to. The first year after the settlement was, in the most honest terms I can offer, the hardest and the best year of my life simultaneously. I repainted the bedroom. This sounds trivial, and it was also not trivial at all. I had been looking at the same gray walls for 9 years, and I painted them a warm terracotta and bought new curtains and rearranged the furniture so that the bed faced the window instead of the door. Small things. But small things are how you begin to make a space your own again. I was promoted. The promotion had been in discussion before any of this happened, but it came through in September. Senior Vice President of Operations, a title that came with a salary increase I had not expected in its size. I hired a part-time nanny for the after-school hours I couldn't cover, a woman named Diane who Lily adored and Connor tolerated with the stoic resignation of an 8-year-old who does not want to admit to liking anything he hasn't chosen himself. Dr. Ellis and I continued our sessions for another 8 months. By the end, I did not need her in the crisis sense anymore. I needed her the way you need a good running partner, someone who keeps the pace honest. I stopped when I was ready to stop, and I knew I was ready because I had stopped waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding through scenarios that had already been resolved. Sandra threw me a dinner party in October, just 8 people, close friends, people I had sometimes neglected during the marriage in the way that people in unhappy marriages often neglect the relationships that would sustain them if they left. I sat at a table with people who knew me and laughed, genuinely for the first time in longer than I could trace. I started running again, not as therapy, but as pleasure. Early mornings along the lakefront, when the sky was still gray-pink and the city had not fully woken up. I had forgotten how much I loved that specific quality of silence. And Daniel? And Lauren? I learned these things not because I sought the information, but because the world is small and people talk, especially in suburbs where everyone knows everyone else's business, whether they want to or not. Daniel moved into an apartment in Oak Park, Lauren's neighborhood, when the settlement was signed. He and Lauren were navigating what it meant to become parents together, under the specific pressure of having become parents through the wreckage of someone else's marriage. Pressure, it turns out, is not a good adhesive. By November, according to my mother, who told me this carefully in the tone of someone offering information they are not sure is welcome, Daniel and Lauren were not living together. He was in the apartment. She was in her studio. There were, apparently, significant disagreements about finances, about the baby's schedule, about the asymmetry of their situation. Lauren delivered a daughter in early October. The baby was healthy. I felt nothing about this, which itself surprised me. I had expected grief or rage or something sharp. What I felt was a flat, clear neutrality, the emotional equivalent of a weather forecast for a day you will not be outside. Lauren's yoga studio struggled. The pandemic years had already thinned her margins, and the months of late pregnancy had limited her capacity to teach. By the following spring, I heard through a mutual friend that she had closed the Oak Park location and was teaching online and substitute classes at other studios. She and Daniel were co-parenting in the legally specified sense, while apparently barely speaking otherwise. I did not gloat. This is not virtue. It is simply that I had learned over the preceding year that gloating requires ongoing attention to the person you are gloating over, and I had better things to do with my attention. I started dating again in the spring, 14 months after the divorce was finalized, cautiously at first. I had been with Daniel since I was 26 years old, and the landscape was unfamiliar in ways I had not fully anticipated. But I was also, at 40, someone who knew herself considerably better than the woman who had sat at that kitchen table in April, with her hands folded and her marriage disassembling around her. The first date was unremarkable. The second was better. The third, a man named James, a high school history teacher with a dry sense of humor and a startling knowledge of obscure Civil War battles, made me laugh so unexpectedly in the middle of dinner that the table next to us turned to look. I did not rush. I did not need to. Lily adjusted better than I had feared. Connor adjusted in the way Connor did everything. Silently and then suddenly all at once. Both of them had dinners with Daniel on his scheduled evenings, and they came home and resumed their lives. and I watch them with the particular vigilance of a mother who is trying to determine what her children actually feel rather than what they are willing to say. And mostly what I saw was that they were okay. My home was full, not in the way it had been full before, not with the particular weight of a life constructed around someone who was quietly living a different life inside it, but in the way that spaces become full when they are genuinely inhabited. Some mornings I woke up before the alarm and lay in the terracotta-colored room in the gray early light and thought about all of it. The 15 years, the kitchen table, the one word. And every morning I came to the same conclusion, that it had happened exactly as it needed to, and that I was standing on the other side of it, and that the other side was considerably better than I had believed it would be in those first dark weeks. I was 40 years old. I had my children, my house, my work, my friends. I had myself, which I had almost lost the habit of keeping. That was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. And so here I am, looking back at the woman who stood at that kitchen counter with a phone in her hand and said one word. I learned that betrayal is never truly sudden. It is only discovered suddenly. I learned that clarity is more powerful than rage, and that the most effective thing you can do in the face of devastation is refuse to be managed by it. I learned that some relationships end not with a door slamming, but with a single quiet sentence. I'll see you in court. Most of all, I learned that you can survive the worst thing you imagine and find, on the other side of it, a life that is more honestly yours than the one you were trying to hold together. What would you have done standing in that kitchen? I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below or share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, I hope this story gave you a reason to be. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know.